You're listening to 99.1 WQRT-LP, and welcome to Radio Free Book Club for March 2025. I'm Ken Honeywell. I'm a writer and reader from Indianapolis, and a couple of months ago we talked about Orbital, the most recent winner of the Booker Prize, but today we are discussing the previous year's Booker Prize winner, Paul Lynch's Prophet Song. It's Lynch's fifth novel. His second novel, The Black Snow, won France's Bookseller Prize, Prix Libre News, for Best Foreign Novel, or something like that. I don't speak French. His third novel, Grace, won the 2018 Carey Group Irish Novel of the Year Award and the 2020 Ireland Francophone Ambassadors Literary Award, Francophonie Ambassadors Literary Award. Prophet Song is the harrowing story of the Stacks, a seemingly average middle-class family who live in Dublin, and what happens to them when the Irish government becomes more authoritarian and tyrannical, leading to civil war. It's told primarily through the viewpoint of Eilish Stack, the mother of the family, and the lengths she goes to keep the family together as their neighborhood becomes a war zone and the world falls apart around them. There's a lot to talk about, so thank goodness we have some of our favorite talkers about novels in the studio today. I would like for them to introduce themselves. First, the esteemed person to my left.
I'm Susan Neville, and I'm a writer and reader.
Yeah,
and former teacher.
And you, Susan, you were saying you have something new coming out?
Yeah, it's the second edition of a book of mine called Fabrication.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember it.
Oh, good.
Hello, Steve.
Ken. Steve Woods. I'm a financial advisor, and I just saw on my phone that we had a very bad day in the market, so
Yeah.
I'm sure that'll get calls tomorrow. But I'm an avid reader and sometimes rarely writer.
Yeah, nice to see you, Steve.
Good to be here.
Hello, Dan.
I'm Dan Barden, former novelist, currently working on my status as a TikTok influencer.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a lot better money.
Is it?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure that's true.
I'm shaking my head.
Well, thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody. And now, before the shooting starts, I'd like to remind listeners that this is a book club. Our discussion will include spoilers, and there's plenty to spoil in Prophet Song. So if you're planning to read it, this would be a good time to stop listening, come back later, which is easy to do, because you can find this and all the episodes of Radio Free Book Club on Spotify, Apple, just about anywhere you stream podcasts. We also encourage you to subscribe to the free Radio Free Book Club Substack for some non-spoiler notes about the book, including whether our panel would recommend it. So let's talk about Prophet Song. Susan, this was actually your selection. Why did you want to talk about it?
It was, and I read it 2 years ago, and at the time I had to, right afterwards, ask my friends for something that I could read that would be less depressing. And it had a huge effect on me when I read it.
Yeah.
And then read it again, and I am still amazed at the skill and of the writing, and also the things that he doesn't say. He never lets you know whether the totalitarian takeover of the government is left or right. It's more about the process of what happens to people when they choose to stay too long, and the process just rings so many bells. I mean, if you read history, you recognize the process, and then reading it lately, or reading it in the last couple of days, I recognized, oh yeah, that's true. That's how that process of this particular kind of violence as it comes out in a culture, how it happens and how people respond, and the kind of, I don't know, Paul, the guy who wrote the book, Paul Lynch. I don't know him. I don't know why I call him Paul, but Paul Lynch, had said that the book isn't really political. It's more metaphysical, and in a way, it seems like it is. It's like, how do human beings work, and so anyway, I just really was very moved by it, and was the second time through as well.
Yeah, yeah. Has anybody read Paul Lynch before? Anybody familiar with Paul
No.
Lynch?
I haven't.
No? Susan? No?
No.
How about, I mean, I know we all know what the Booker Prize is. Do you typically read the Booker Prize winning books? Is that something that you do?
I do. I mean, in fact, I'm really into the Booker Prize. I think because my favorite writers have always been British for whatever reason. So, I read the Booker Prize books. I go back and read old ones. I read the shortlisted books, and sometimes I almost always think, even if I don't love the book, I almost always can see why.
Yeah.
Why it was considered as a finalist.
Well, I knew you were a fan of Orbital.
Right, I was.
Yeah. Either of you guys read Orbital?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, I really loved it too. We talked about it a couple shows ago, and I was really the only one who really loved it.
Oh, that's funny. Well, yeah, you would either hate that book or love it, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, it's plotless,
Yeah,
really.
completely plotless.
Yeah. But yeah, I thought it was beautiful. So, Steve, how about you? What'd you think of the book? What worked for you? What maybe didn't work for you?
I liked it. It was frustrating, certainly at times. I really did like the way that that he wrote. I liked that third person. At the beginning, the lack of quotes and things like that were a little distracting. But it did lend to kind of the hectic pace of what she was having to endure. So that I did like that just from a stylistic standpoint. To Susan's point earlier, I was questioning why a lot. Like, what happened? How did this happen? Certainly looking at it within the backdrop of what's going on here now, and some questions about ability to assemble and things like that. How could our society devolve into something like that without a huge event? So that I was kind of wondering what that huge event was, but it really didn't distract from what I think he was trying to achieve.
And what do you think he was trying to achieve?
Just kind of hold a mirror up to society and show you what could possibly happen if things went too far.
Yeah. Dan, what do you think?
I ended up really loving the book. I mean, I tend to avoid is too strong a word. Avoid Booker Prize novels because there's always some irritation factor for me. There's always something that they throw away that I'm fond of, in service of art that is often hard for me to get over. Like in this case, the lack of paragraphs. I really like paragraphs. I think they're
That's going to be a specific question for you, Dan.
Partic-
You're a lover of paragraphs.
Yeah, particularly in the 21st century, I think paragraphs are very important. And so for the first 20, 30 pages, I was just like, again, I did it. I'm sorry. Oh fudge. I really would like to edit this for him. It's just like, give it to me for 3 weeks. I'll put in paragraphs. I'll break it all down. It'll be the same novel. I'm not going to change any words. But then after a while, I got the hang of it because I knew I had to read it for the book club, and I still would argue that it could have been a more conventionally, I don't know what word I'm searching for. I don't want to say structured because it's this. I think the structure, this could have been, a thriller. I mean, I think, in fact, I think that right, so many things that I want to say. Okay, so first of all,
Yeah.
I love the book. I love the story. I don't want to make too big a deal out of this, but I will say that I felt like, and this is like a problem that I have with Booker Prize winning novels in general, is that it was as though someone had a conversation and going, this novel could be a little too popular. Is there something we can do to make it more arty so that it'll put off people that might, so that we make sure we don't get the thriller crowd? We don't want anybody reading this book that's read the Da Vinci Code. And so they I know, let's get rid of the paragraphs. That'll throw them off. But because it was just like, in terms of the dramatic structure of the thing, it was just like, stuff's happening. It's just thing after thing after thing after thing, and it almost like it was almost so. I mean, and again, I'm not criticizing this either, but it was like it was almost too much. You know what I mean? It's like I God forgive me. At a certain point, I was like, okay, yeah, I know it's a war zone, but isn't she going to catch a break at some point? Isn't there going to be some point at which things are better for her? I know that's not true. And I know that this kind of horror exists in the world right now. It's just not existing in the world right now in places like the Republic of Ireland.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I want to say two things. One is I think that paragraphs work like line breaks in poetry. So when you've got this long, it makes it propulsive to me. I mean, I didn't miss paragraphs at all because it would have made a different music, I think, to the text. The other thing, it doesn't happen in Ireland, and I think, or it probably has, but that was part of the brilliance of it because he was inspired by what was going on in Syria and how how Europe was treating migrants. So what a brilliant thing to say, okay, let's have it happen in a Western country where you think it can't really happen here and show it happen, not say, who it is, why, just show the steps by which little by little by little by little a country falls under totalitarianism and all the kind of dark side of human nature comes absolutely out, even in, your neighbors, in all the boys who are, suddenly 16 and 17 and 18 and having to fight on one side or the other. If it had been in a country we knew that this had happened, I think it would not have been as powerful because as it is, we really identify with Eilish, the woman who's there because she thinks her husband isn't really disappeared. That can't really happen in a country like this. He might walk in the door any minute. And then, I have to take care of my father. And she's constantly in this propulsive narrative, which is so beautiful to me. She's like, things are happening, bombs are falling, but at the same time, she has to pick up her son's pacifier from the floor and get it clean before she gives it to him. I mean, it's constantly, she's trying to keep up the civilization and love her kids and, and her parents and try to, make things happen in that way. And so anyway, I thought that was a brilliant choice.
Yeah, I think I opened the book, so I read this also a couple of years ago, but I think I listened to it a couple of years ago.
and there were paragraphs.
Right. And when I opened the book this time, it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe what I've just gotten myself into.
Yeah, I listened to one chapter on my headphones, and I was like, there's the paragraphs, because he knew where the paragraphs were.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So that I felt intimidated by that at first, but I also came to see that as an element of the storytelling that I really felt like I understood.
Yeah, I felt like I understood it. It didn't. And maybe that's Booker Prize thing too. I mean, there have been so many books where the point of view is switching all over the place, and there are no quotation marks, and you just kind of get used to what it's trying to do.
Well, and I just want to say I don't disagree with anything that Susan said, except for the paragraph. It's like, and then after a while, I had to accept that the kind of precise reading that I like to do when I'm reading a novel wasn't going to be possible for me. That I was going to be barreling through these things, and another thing was like the commas, like just commas everywhere, and and a lot of times I wasn't sure what was going on, but after 100 or so pages, I just thought, this is just like Eilish's life. Just like everything's just running together, and nothing's working the way it's supposed to. So I accepted it, and it made the novel work for me.
Yeah, Steve, any comment on the paragraphs and you mentioned them, but how did they affect your reading?
It was tough to know when to stop. Like, you can't. I have a certain amount of time to read, and then you have to just kind of wait for a period at the very end of a page, or I'd keep going. But it was, like I said, it was kind of frustrating in the beginning, but then I kind of understood what he was trying to do, and have that pace just be, faster and faster and faster. And so, like I said, that it made sense towards the end, but it was frustrating at the beginning.
Yeah, I was, as I said, I don't think it bothered me. The thing that bothered me the most about the whole book was at the start of it, there were a few, like on Star Trek and kind of like science fiction writing, it's kind of like they're called, "As you know, Jim." And it's like Larry was like, "As you know, Eilish, I am the Deputy Secretary of the Teachers Union of Ireland." Mm-hmm. There was a little bit of that stuff that bugged me, but it was over really quick, and it just you're right. It was one thing after the other, and to me, it felt very realistic, like the way things broke down. First, in a large way. There were protests, and then there were, like, she applied for a passport, and that was going to be a hassle. And then things got closer and closer to home. It just felt super realistic to me.
One of the things that I look for in fiction is for somebody to do the work to think really hard about the way the world works and what the implications of their story are. And I was so, delighted, it's not the word, but it was like, there were so many points in the book where I was like, yeah, I bet that would happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh yeah. He put a lot of work into figuring out research into what precisely this would look like. And I was also moved by, that it was the breakdown of all, like, I was driving over here late, and so much of our society is like, you just trust the people to do the things that they're supposed to do, right? If someone, is in the road with you, they're going to stay on their side of the road. They're not going to go right. You're not going to have a head-on collision on Washington Street.
If you go to the butcher store, you expect them to just sell you the lamb.
Yeah, and there were so many breakdowns like that it's like, when I think about the government of the United States, for example, I don't think about traffic laws, I don't think about the butcher, I don't think about all these things that I just take for granted. But in a situation like Syria, those things would go really quickly.
Yeah. Steve, how about you? Did you find the story to be realistic?
I did. It was, and I wrote this note, it's kind of like, pulling a thread on a sweater that she just keeps more and more, and the sweater's just disintegrating. That first little thread was her husband losing his job, and she tried to maintain a Pollyanna attitude with the kids, really until she couldn't. But she kept that going for a long, long time, to the frustration of the older son. I'm blanking on his name.
Mark.
Was it Mark? And then Bailey, the daughter, even had her kind of crisis moment. But it was just that kind of unraveling of her entire life, and subsequently the kind of fabric of the entire country.
Yeah, let's talk about the kids a little bit. Susan, what'd you think of the kids and how they were portrayed?
I kind of was thinking of it through the point of view of the mom. And from the point of view of a mom, the kids were portrayed quite accurately.
Yeah.
I thought each one of them was interesting. The one that was not as fleshed out was the oldest one, Mark. But
Well, he disappeared earlier.
He disappeared quite early to fight, and then Bailey. Yeah, I thought that the kids were as well portrayed as a mother would see her children, I think. I mean, she wanted them to get to school every day, even though the schools obviously are going to be closed, and Bailey points that out. There's a war going on outside the window. No, you've got to go to school. And they would whine about it. And they were kids. They were loving and loved and obnoxious at times, and the baby was constantly demanding and needing, to be fed. I thought the kids were done well.
Yeah, I thought their responses, their individual responses to the war were all interesting. Mark was gonna fight to get his dad back, and Molly had an eating disorder basically, and broke down. But then, at the end of the book, really rallied. And poor Bailey. Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, poor Bailey.
Yeah.
The only part that bothered me about the whole Bailey was that worm.
The worm has turned.
He's like, the worm is coming to eat. Like, it seemed like the author wanted, he had a thought. I don't know that Bailey was the best character for that. That seemed like a very, thought out analogy for this character who's still wetting his bed at 13. So he's clearly in between that, boy and man, and something like this would certainly accelerate that initiation process. But that part, kind of like when Larry was like, as you know, his little soliloquy about the worm was just a little heavy-handed, I thought.
Yeah, I thought he just didn't know what it meant. I thought he heard someone say it, and he really didn't know what it meant. I don't know. Did you have any reaction to that, Susan?
I can see that. I mean, I guess my response would be that his feeling that a worm has gotten into all of them seems like the way a 12 or 13-year-old might try to understand it or explain it. The fact that it's, the worm is turned or whatever, I mean, I'm not sure that that's really what he was thinking about, but the fact that it was something that was in all of them, because that was one of the interesting things in the book, too. That it's not that there was like a single totalitarian person that was making all this happen. It was the process of what happens when that kind of evil erupts in a culture, and it gets into all of them. Your neighbor who is, a good person is waiting for you at the hospital saying, I'm sorry, we've sent your son to another hospital. I cannot tell you who it is, because they all get very, they're part of the power, and they feel that power. And so, I don't know. I see your point.
Yeah. You're listening to Radio Free Book Club, and we're talking about the novel Prophet Song by Paul Lynch. Dan, I sense you have something to say about this.
About what? Which part? Which part?
Oh,
I was just enjoying listening.
Oh, Yeah, just a let's talk about let's talk a little bit about Larry. Did you have any hope that Larry was ever coming back?
I, I mean, again, like that's one of the things that, I mean, it was such a plot-driven book, and I don't want to fault it for that because that's, you know, a lot of what my reading experience is made of. But it's like, Larry could come back. It doesn't seem like he's gonna, and I think that it's probably she overvalued the possibility and stayed too long in Ireland. But weird things can happen. You know what I mean? People, you know, appear out of, you know, Holocausts like this one all the time, which is precisely the problem that she has. You know, it's precisely the problem that she has, believing that things are as bad as they are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when and you know the whole thing with her son, like with Bailey dying, is like absolutely. He walks into the wrong room, he meets the wrong interrogator, he's done. He walks into another room, he goes to surgery. I mean, it's just like this is the problem with all the systems breaking down.
Right. It's the Zimborska poem could have.
Yeah.
If you know that poem, which I love. Yeah, it's.
But you know, I mean, the needs of the novel were for it to get worse and worse and worse and worse. But it's such a, like, when you can't count on anything, you know. I mean, I think that her staying there, staying in Ireland for her son and her husband, was reasonable. But it was just as reasonable to leave. That was the problem.
Yeah.
Do you think it was her father that was keeping her in Ireland more so than her family would? Her family would have been easier to relocate had she done so maybe earlier. I always felt like she had to stay for her father because he was, you know, he had dementia and was just not going to go anywhere, and she had that duty to him as well. I felt like he was the anchor that really held her back as her hope was diminishing.
But he told her to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean,
He did tell her to go.
In a moment of incredible clarity,
Well-
you know, you've got to go.
Well,
You've
see,
got
well, you know,
to-
and that was one of the that was my favorite. Actually, that was my favorite moment in the whole book, because that's what I mean about that, like, kind of lifelike absurdity, is that he just, like, comes out of the dementia for a moment and goes, "This is what's going to happen. You've got to go," and then he goes right back into the dementia.
Right.
And it served the plot, but it was like, it was also just like, yeah, that's, sometimes they come out of dementia and
Yeah.
are the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. He said something early in the book that really struck me. He said, "We're both scientists, Eilish. We belong to a tradition, but tradition is nothing more than what everyone can agree on. The scientists, the teachers, the institutions. If you change ownership of the institutions, then you can change ownership of the facts. You can alter the structure of belief, what is agreed upon. That is what they are doing, Eilish. It is really quite simple. The NAP is trying to change what you and I call reality. They want to muddy it like water. If you say one thing is another thing and you say it enough times, then it must be so. And if you keep saying it over and over, people accept it as true." And that was all. That was all commas, and there was no period at the end of what I just said. But yeah, that was Simon in this lucid moment.
Even
saying,
explaining how, you know, this particular thing that's happening is changing our reality from one where we believe, like you said, in the rule of law. And, you know, you walk down the street and people are going to be crossing at the light, and, you know, you believe in the rule, and that's reality, that we are all good and trying to live in a civilization. And all it takes is, what was it called? The name they had for, sorry, we've got to override the Constitution.
"Oh, like the Emergency
There was
Act
an
or
emergency
something."
act, an emergency order, which is, I think, something, you know, that happens in every country where this happens. Suddenly there's an emergency order for some reason or another, and suddenly the courts don't have power. And But you always think they do. You think if something bad happens to you, that there's somebody to go tell. The policemen are there, or somebody's
Right.
there.
You can bring a lawsuit or something.
Right, right.
Yeah. So this book is obviously it's set in Ireland. Ireland today is a nice, stable democracy. I guess the question is, do you see parallels in this book of anything that is happening here that scared you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can we mention a couple of them?
Well, I mean, we've got an executive, president of the United States that's just lies to us every time he opens his mouth, and he's actively changing the nature of reality. I have a friend that I see fairly often who's a Trump supporter, and I said to him today, I said, so Trump says it's okay if we have a recession because that's just part of the way that we're going to get to this glorious new future. And I expected him to push back, and he just said, no, that's right.
Yeah. Tell it to our financial advisor
Right.
sitting next to you.
Yeah. I mean, that attitude would be like a controlled burn in a forest. But I don't see how that gets us there any easier than having a steady hand at the wheel. But, as I said earlier with one of the threats was that we'd start arresting people that protested.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the way that this whole thing started.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very close parallel that kind of gives you some pause. And this moves from a fiction to, oh my gosh, that could
Well, someone
could
was
happen.
arrested today for protesting.
Right.
And so there are protests about that arrest. The reason that it was so interesting to read it a second time too is like I've read so many books by people who stayed in Nazi Germany and watching the process and why they stayed, and people who own factories, people who and the things that happen. Again, I keep calling it a process. It doesn't matter who the leader is in some ways. It's the process when it takes hold, and all those things that happened in the book. The first time I read it, I was thinking, oh yeah, I recognize that from reading about 1930s Germany. Just recognized every step in the way, including, it won't happen. We have rule of law. We can protest. We can be together. It doesn't make sense. Nobody's that illogical, to then having this sort of euphoria that groups of people get when it's like, meaning. There's a possibility of a utopia, and we can get there if we just somebody takes control and makes it happen. All those things, you suddenly feel like life has meaning again, or so just kind of watching how institutions have been are trying to be broken down or feel that they are, and the way we keep saying things like, it's okay that their laws, it's okay, they won't come to my house. And plus, I mean, the big thing is that my kid's got a game coming up this weekend, and he's been excited about that all this kind of everydayness and wishing to not kind of watch the steps. It's like, I don't know how you can stop those steps.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, kind of as Dan pointed out too, it's kind of like the world goes on. You pick up the pacifier and wash it. You have to go to the store to get toilet paper and chocolate while the world's falling apart around you. I thought it was interesting that there was a scene where they had a big protest, like there were 50,000 people in the street protesting, and it was kind of euphoric. And then everybody just kind of went home because the kids had to eat and they had to go to work the next day. And that was it. Except then that night they came and smashed the heads of all the protesters who were still hanging out there. Right. Yeah, I fear that. I fear that we can mount a big protest of 50, 100,000 people to shake our fists and say we don't like something, but then go home.
I fear that the shaking of the fists is also kind of buying into,
Sure.
it's adding to the sense of violence that's in the air or the sense of chaos. Like, so I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I'm sorry.
I mean, I think
It's very-
in the situation we're in right now, and possibly in Eilish's situation as well. I mean, you have to be double-minded about the thing. I mean, I'm pretty happy at this moment in my life, and part of the reason that I'm happy is because I know that there's fundamentally nothing I can do about this. But also, it's necessary that I try to do something about this. The two things exist in the same space. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I was like, I've always been prepared to leave. You know what I mean? Ever since I saw The Sound of Music, I knew that I knew that you just have to be ready to go. You know what I mean? And
you have your get out bag or whatever it's called.
well, you know,
Go
it's
bag.
like
Your go
Bug
bag,
out.
right?
I mean,
Your
like,
bug out bag.
I mean, my ancestors were, running from the potato famine, and it's we're not, I can go somewhere else, if I have to. I hope I'm better prepared for that than most people.
Yeah. So you would, if this situation came to our hometown, you would leave pretty early, you think?
If my son was in danger, or he was going to be conscripted or something like that, or it was becoming too dangerous for him, I would go. I would just go, because that's what I mean, it helps that I don't have $10 million in the bank, or and I'm not attached to my furniture, which is all from IKEA, right?
Right.
But I know people for whom it would be a lot harder, but it wouldn't be hard for me.
Yeah. Steve?
Well, it makes you wonder about the very first people that do leave and how they're viewed from society. Like, these people are crazy, and then it just turns out they just were the first ones to kind of figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But that first wave would be like, it would have been interesting if they had somebody in their neighborhood that had just left, and what conversations were around that.
Mm-hmm.
They'd all been, I think, just as crazy on the other side of the scale as to what's happening. But as everything starts kind of coming in, you realize that they were just way ahead of the game.
Well, and it's like that. I mean, I think it's hopefully one of the things that we depend on fiction for, is to give us like this sense of, I mean, for me anyways, the absurdity of life. You know what I mean? And that it could be the right decision, or it could be the wrong decision.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he moved to Canada and gave up all of his 401k, and now he's a greeter at Walmart. That was kind of dumb. You know what I mean? Kamala Harris got elected the second time, and everything's fine. But but that's the nature of reality. I mean, Eilish is doing all the right things, and in a lot of ways, and they're not working out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And she's doing a lot of wrong things, and they're not working out.
Yeah.
I think I think I personally want to have a lot of compassion for myself and for people who are in situations like this, because it's like there's no right answer.
Yeah. Steve, it reminds me of, it's not parallel really, but it reminds me of the Tim O'Brien story. I can't remember the name
On
of
the
it.
Rainy River.
On the Rainy River. And And when I read that story, I thought, oh my gosh, that's me. I would brand myself a coward for leaving. And I would go to Vietnam and probably be killed in Vietnam.
Right.
I thought you were going to say, what is the what? In
Oh.
the part where they're swimming across, the refugees are swimming across this crocodile infested river, and they're getting shot at.
Oh, right.
And they don't know how to swim, and they're crocodile food. And then also in Broken, if you remember that, where he's down in a plane and he's in a life raft, and the Japanese Zero's shooting at him, so he jumps out, and there's sharks there. It was kind of that hopelessness that Eilish was kind of realizing that whichever way she turned was the wrong way, and she wasn't getting really any help. And she had to, at one point, she had to save her daughter from an interrogation or an interview with
Yeah, right.
a man, and it's like, it's all just heartbreaking.
But the most heartbreaking part was when she had to get Bailey to the hospital because Bailey had been injured trying to save someone from the rubble. And she takes him to the hospital, but there's no room at any of the children's hospitals, so she lies and says that he's 16 and he's really 13, and that's what... So she makes this decision that she thinks is the great decision, and then he ends up being taken to an adult hospital where he is then interrogated and killed.
Yeah. I knew that was coming, and it was hard for
I
me
did
to read that
too.
again.
It was so hard.
Yeah. So Eilish's sister says history is a silent record of people who did not know when to leave. What do you think she meant by that? Anyone?
Well, if you stay someplace when things are going really bad, then and you end up being unlucky.
Go to the concert, sing for the Nazis, and then get the hell out of Austria, right? No, it's just how can you make that decision? I mean, it's just a terrible decision.
This is the first time I think I've ever really understood the line freedom as another word for nothing left to lose, because it's like, it's easier to do that if you have all of your 7 children or however many there were at the captain's house and a beautiful, talented nun, that you can walk over the mountains with. But if you've got, like you were saying, Steve, the father who's sick and won't leave his house, and you've got kids in different schools, and you've got a husband who's disappeared and cannot possibly be dead, you tell yourself, then more and more, and maybe even a love for your homeland, not your government, but your homeland.
Well, I mean, I think that is what I would have the hardest trouble with leaving. Not even a love for my country, but more just a reaction against the people who are trying to take it away from me.
Exactly.
I would have a little bit of a hard time with that, I think, but I don't know. I don't know that any of us would know exactly until something like this happened to us.
I think the other thing that I sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was just thinking that the thing that I took out of reading this the first time and just remembering to keep that when you're thinking, what can you do, is like understand that it's not easy to be a refugee. It's not easy to be an immigrant, to treat people who have come from a difficult place with kindness. They're your neighbors. And so, I don't know, that makes me feel like there's something more that can be done.
Yeah. Has anybody seen The Brutalist?
No.
It's kind of a refugee story as well.
Unfortunately, the people that need to read this book are not the people that are reading this book, I'm pretty sure.
Well, because, Dan, they don't like the Booker Prize novels.
Some
or they
damn
don't like
paragraphs.
books.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like it's one of the fundamental just disjunctions in my mind, having grown up with California and having grown up in California and having grown up with a lot of immigrants, legal and illegal. I don't understand how any human being can like disparage an immigrant.
I can't either.
An immigrant is like going to be the best person that you meet. You know, like just period. Like, you know, I'm sure there are criminals in there. I've never met any of them. You know, and there's this. It's just, you know, to go through the things that Eilish goes through in order to save her family, sort of almost has to make you a good person. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I don't.
Yeah, and you think after going through everything she went through that she would be celebrated, you know, rather than being taken advantage of. And for
Again
every
and again.
second,
Yeah.
as she finally does leave, but she has to keep giving money, you
Right.
know, or it's just it's awful.
Yeah. Yeah. Steve, what'd you think of the ending?
I think in one of your notes you said, could it be a sequel? I just assumed that there was going to be a hole in the boat at some point when they were going across. I mean, it's just like it's a Murphy's Law. If anything could go wrong, it seems it did. But I think it was hopeful at the end.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're rooting for them the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
You just hate to see all these things go wrong. So I hope that the boat didn't sink.
Yeah. They're almost out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Almost.
Dan, what'd you think? What'd you think of the
Well,
ending?
do we know which direction they're leaving Ireland?
No.
I wanted to like calculate their chances. I mean, I've been on a ferry from England to Ireland, and I know that that's not a big deal trip, but it's like we know so much in this century about how poorly immigrants fare in zodiacs, and so like I'm scared for them.
Well,
Yeah.
they were going north, I believe. I believe they were going to Northern Ireland.
Oh, so they're just trying to go around the side of the island?
Well,
Or are they
I
going
think
to
they
England?
got to Northern Ireland, right?
And then I assumed they were going to go to England, and her sister was going to fly her to Canada, but I don't know
something like
Yeah,
that.
something like that.
Yeah, but we didn't ever really know. They mentioned a town name that I looked up, and it was kind of close to a border town in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
That was kind of northwest of Dublin.
Northern Ireland didn't sound like a fun, safe place for them either.
No, it really didn't.
No. Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably always sketchy traveling anywhere in a rubber boat, you know. But I don't know. I don't know. They won because they got this far. I mean, it's a victory to even get to where they got, you know.
Yeah, but we don't know. You know,
We don't know.
we really don't know. Before we talk about whether we'd recommend it, is there anything anybody else feels like they need to say about the book that we haven't talked about?
No, I won't.
You're welcome to, Dan.
Well, I mean, it's just my argument with the Booker Prize, and I think one of the things that the lack of paragraphs and traditional punctuation did is that it paved over a lot of clunky parts in the book that would have been more obvious if we weren't just blowing through this narrative, particularly near the beginning. There were a lot of things where I was just like, what? Like where she suddenly agrees with something that he says, and you're like, no, why did she agree with that? And then it was like, poof, you're moving on. And by the end, and there was a lot of, the language was so beautiful, and he's such a good writer, but there were times when he was just like somebody needed to take a pencil to some of that stuff. But it didn't really matter because you're just blowing through so much prose so quickly.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But it's a small quibble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I assume by that you would recommend this book
Yes, of course.
to
Yeah.
a lot of people who probably won't ever read it.
Yes, yes. Uh,
Yeah.
I really liked the woman at the end who talked to Eilish and gave her like the only kind of hopeful feeling. I mean, to me, remember, we're the lucky ones seeking a better life. There's only looking forward now. Isn't that right? Perhaps there's a little freedom to be found in that thought, because at least you can make the future your own in your thoughts. And if we keep looking back, we will die in a way. And she sees her children delivered into a world of devotion and love, and sees them damned to a world of terror, wishing for such a world to end, wishing for the world its destruction. And she looks at her infant son, this child who remains an innocent, and she sees how she's fallen afoul of herself, seeing that, I'm skipping part of it, out of terror comes pity, and out of pity comes love, and out of love the world can be redeemed again. And she can see that the world does not end, that it is vanity to think the world will end during your lifetime in some sudden event, that what ends is your life is only your life, that what is sung by the prophets is but the same song sung across time. The coming of the sword, the world devoured by fire, the sun gone down into the earth at noon. And then the prophet sings not of the end of the world, but what has been and what will be. And
then there's a period somewhere far down the line
it
there.
goes on. Sorry, I understand now the problem with no periods, because you could just keep going on forever and ever. But there is a kind of like, I mean, the book is in the end about, do you have any free will at all? Can you? You just kind of watch it happen and then hope
Yeah.
that, because they all stayed because of love for something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, but that's the only good thing there is too. So.
And I take it that you might also recommend this book to
I'm sorry.
readers.
Yes, I would definitely recommend it. Sorry.
Steve Woods?
I would recommend it. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Me for. Yeah, I really enjoyed it the first time through. It's hard to say you enjoyed such a difficult, scary, harrowing novel.
We just hope it's fiction, right?
Right. We just hope it's fiction. Steve, do you have a book recommendation for?
I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I'd never read East of Eden, and I'm about halfway through that, and I had to begrudgingly stop reading it to read this, and now I'm picking back up and should finish it.
All right, East of Eden.
Yeah.
Awesome. Dan?
I just finished reading, oh God, I just can't remember her name, a book called Brother of the More Famous Jack. You know this book?
I've heard of it.
I've heard of it too.
I feel like I've maybe even.
We'll put a note in our show notes about the author.
And it was just sort of a delightful, weird tour through the 60s and 70s and 80s, and I think got up to the 80s in Britain by. It was a novel that was sort of reclaimed and republished in America, and Brother of the More Famous Jack by Barbara Trapido, I think is how you pronounce that. But it was a lovely book.
Cool. That sounds great. Susan?
I'm going to recommend The Safe Keep, a novel by Yale van der Wouden, Wouden. It was another Booker finalist.
Okay. How do you think Dan would like it?
I don't know.
Does it have paragraphs?
It has
Punctuation?
paragraphs. It has punctuation.
All right.
It has a surprise ending that I did not see coming, but other people have said they saw it coming. So.
All right. That sounds interesting. All right, so I'm not a very big graphic novel reader, but I do like them. I typically read one or two a year, and I think it's just an interesting experience. It's kind of cinematic, It's kind of like watching a movie. But anyway, I was in Half Price Books a couple of weeks ago, and I had just actually been thinking about writing something that had to do with the shootings at Kent State University in 1970. And I stumbled across this graphic, I guess it's not a novel. Well, it's kind of a novel, but anyway, I'll call it a graphic novel. It's called Kent State, Four Dead in Ohio. It's by Durf Backdurf. His real name is John, but I'm sure he just calls himself Durf, who grew up near Kent, but he's most famous for his graphic novel My Friend Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer, he was friends with Jeffrey Dahmer in high school. And that was since made into a movie, I guess, also. But anyway, Kent State follows the students who were killed in the Kent State shooting for 4 or 5 days before the shooting. And it's really kind of moving. And if you can stand any more heartbreak and outrage after Prophet Song, and you're concerned about, threats to crack down on campus in America, it's really a really good book. Yeah, Kent State, Four Dead in Ohio. And that's all for us today. Remember, you can stream Radio Free Book Club practically anywhere you get your podcasts. Find notes for this and all of our shows on our Radio Free Book Club Substack, to which we hope you'll consider subscribing. For Susan Neville, Dan Barden, Steve Woods, and all the members of Radio Free Book Club, I'm Ken Honeywell. Thanks for listening, and join us next month when we'll be back in America and on the road, kinda, with Miranda July's 2024 novel, All Fours. Until then, read a book.